The wagon wheels had stopped turning 3 days ago, and the silence was worse than the screaming had been. 8-year-old Tommy sat beside his father's body, his small hands still clutching the man's cold fingers. The desert stretched endlessly around them, painted in shades of orange and red as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Papa, please wake up," Tommy whispered for the 100th time, though he knew his father couldn't hear him anymore. The fever had taken him just like it had taken Mama 2 months earlier back in Missouri. Now Tommy was alone with nothing but the desert wind and the circling buzzards overhead. His stomach cramped with hunger. The last of their food had spoiled in the heat, and the water barrel was nearly empty. Tommy had tried to keep the oxen alive, but they had wandered off during the night, leaving him stranded in the middle of nowhere with a broken wagon and no way forward or back. The boy remembered his father's stories about this land. "There are good people and bad people out here, son," Papa had said while they crossed the prairie weeks ago. "The Apache are fierce warriors, but they understand honor and family. The worst enemies are sometimes the ones who look like friends." As darkness fell, Tommy crawled under the wagon for shelter. He could hear strange sounds in the distance. Coyotes howling, the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the sagebrush. Every shadow seemed to hide danger. Every sound made him jump. He pulled his father's old coat around his shoulders and tried not to cry, but the tears came anyway. Given away just like Papa, he sobbed into the dusty ground. First his mother had been given away to the fever. Then Papa had been taken too. Now he was alone, and it felt like the whole world had given up on him. Morning brought no relief. Tommy's lips were cracked from thirst and his head pounded from the heat. He knew he had to leave his father's body, but the thought of walking away made him feel sick inside. Papa had always protected him, always known what to do. Without him, Tommy felt smaller than ever. He was trying to figure out which direction to walk when he heard the sound of horses approaching. His heart raced as he saw dust clouds rising in the distance. Papa had warned him about raiders and bandits who preyed on travelers. Tommy crawled back under the wagon and held his breath. The riders appeared like ghosts emerging from the heat shimmer. There were 5 of them, sitting tall on painted horses. Their skin was dark from the sun, and their long black hair was decorated with feathers and beads. Tommy had never seen Apache warriors before, but something in their bearing told him these were men to be respected and feared. The leader dismounted and approached the wagon. He was older than the others, with silver streaking his hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of many years spent under the desert sun. His clothes were a mixture of traditional Apache garb and pieces taken from the white man's world. Leather pants, a cotton shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his weathered face. Tommy watched as the man examined his father's body with respectful silence. The warrior spoke something in Apache to his companions, then knelt beside the wagon where Tommy was hiding. "Come out, little one," the man said in heavily accented English. "I know you are there." Tommy's whole body trembled. Every story he had ever heard about Apache raids flashed through his mind. But something in the man's voice was gentle, almost fatherly. Slowly, Tommy crawled out from under the wagon and stood on shaking legs. The Apache warrior studied him carefully. Tommy was small for his age, with sandy brown hair bleached lighter by the sun and blue eyes that seemed too large in his thin face. His clothes were dirty and torn, and he looked like he hadn't eaten in days. "What is your name, boy?" the warrior asked. "Tommy," the boy whispered. "Tommy Mitchell." "I am called Red Bear by your people," the man said, "though my true name is different." "Where are your people, Tommy Mitchell?" Tommy pointed at his father's body. "Papa died 3 days ago. Mama died before we left Missouri. There's nobody else." Red Bear's expression softened. He had seen many tragedies in his 45 years, but something about this small boy touched something deep in his heart. His own son had been killed in a cavalry raid 2 years earlier, shot down while trying to protect their village. The pain of that loss still haunted his dreams. "You have been alone for 3 days?" Red Bear asked. Tommy nodded. "The oxen ran away. I don't know which way to go." The other Apache warriors had dismounted and were examining the wagon and its contents. They spoke among themselves in their native language, occasionally glancing at Tommy with expressions that seemed more curious than threatening. Red Bear stood and walked around the wagon, taking in the full picture of what had happened. This was clearly a family heading west, probably looking for land or gold like so many others. The man had died of sickness, not violence. There were no signs of attack or robbery. It was simply another tragedy in a land that was full of them. Your father, Red Bear said, returning to Tommy's side. He was taking you where? California, Tommy said. He said we could start over there. Make a new life, Red Bear nodded. Many families had the same dream, though few of them understood how harsh the journey could be. This boy's father had been better prepared than most. The wagon was well built, and there were signs that he had planned carefully for the trip. But sickness was something no amount of preparation could prevent. You cannot stay here, Red Bear told Tommy. The desert will kill you within days. Tommy looked around at the endless wasteland surrounding them. He knew the warrior was right. Without water, without food, without any idea which direction to go, he would die just like Papa had. Are you going to kill me? Tommy asked quietly. The question surprised Red Bear. Why would I kill you, little one? Papa said some people think all Indians are bad, and some people think all white people are bad. He said it was stupid, but people think it anyway. Red Bear almost smiled at the boy's honesty. Your papa was a wise man. What else did he tell you? Tommy thought for a moment. He said the Apache understand family. And honor. He said you take care of your own people just like we do. Your papa spoke truth, Red Bear said. But you are not Apache. You are not our people. Tommy's face fell. If these warriors wouldn't help him, he truly was lost. However, Red Bear continued, you are a child alone in the desert. No honorable man leaves a child to die no matter what people he comes from. Hope flickered in Tommy's eyes. You'll help me? Red Bear looked at the boy for a long moment, seeing something in those blue eyes that reminded him of his own lost son. We will see, Tommy Mitchell. We will see. Red Bear spent the next hour making decisions that would change both his life and Tommy's forever. The other warriors watched silently as their leader examined the broken wagon and the few belongings scattered around it. They had been hunting raiders who had been attacking Apache settlements, but finding this lone boy had changed their mission entirely. We cannot leave him, Red Bear announced to his men in Apache. The spirits have placed him in our path for a reason. One of the younger warriors, a fierce-looking man named Swift Arrow, shook his head. He is white, Red Bear. His people kill our children without mercy. Why should we show kindness to theirs? Because we are not like them, Red Bear replied firmly. We do not punish children for the crimes of their fathers. And this boy's father harmed no one. The debate continued for several minutes while Tommy sat in the shade of the wagon, watching nervously. He couldn't understand the Apache language, but he could tell they were arguing about him. The tone of their voices and their gestures made it clear that not everyone agreed with Red Bear's desire to help. Finally, an older warrior named Grey Wolf spoke up. If we take him, what then? We cannot bring a white child to our village. The others will not accept him. Then we do not take him to the village, Red Bear said. Not yet. First, he must learn our ways. He must prove that he can become one of us. Tommy watched as Red Bear approached him again. The warrior knelt down so they were at eye level, his dark eyes studying the boy's face carefully. Tommy Mitchell, Red Bear said slowly, I will offer you a choice. We can take you to the nearest town and leave you there. Maybe someone will care for you, maybe not. Or you can come with us and learn to live as we do. What does that mean? Tommy asked. It means leaving behind everything you knew about being white. It means learning to hunt, to track, to survive in the desert. It means following Apache ways and Apache laws. It will not be easy. Tommy looked around at the empty desert, then back at his father's body. Going to a town meant being alone again, probably ending up in an orphanage if he was lucky. These men were offering him something else, a chance to belong somewhere even if it was different from anything he had ever known. If I go with you, will you teach me to be strong like my papa was? Tommy asked. Something shifted in Red Bear's expression. Stronger, he promised. Then I want to go with you. Red Bear stood and spoke to his men again in Apache. This time the discussion was shorter. Whatever he said seemed to settle the matter, though Swift Arrow still looked unhappy about the decision. We will bury your father properly, Red Bear told Tommy. Then we ride. Tommy watched as the Apache warriors worked together to prepare his father's grave. They chose a spot on a small rise overlooking the desert, where the morning sun would always reach it. Red Bear explained that they were honoring Tommy's father as a brave man who had died far from home while trying to provide for his son. As they lowered his father's body into the ground, Tommy felt like part of himself was being buried too. Everything familiar, everything safe was going into that grave. When Red Bear placed a hand on his shoulder, Tommy leaned into the gesture, desperate for any kind of comfort. "Say goodbye, little one," Red Bear said gently, "but do not say goodbye to his memory. That stays with you always." Tommy knelt beside the grave and placed his hand on the fresh earth. "I love you, Papa. I'll try to make you proud." The journey that followed was unlike anything Tommy had ever experienced. Red Bear put him on a gentle mare and taught him how to sit properly, how to hold the reins, how to move with the horse instead of fighting it. The other warriors rode in formation around them, constantly watching for danger. They traveled mostly at dawn and dusk, avoiding the worst heat of the day. During the middle hours, they would rest in whatever shade they could find, and Red Bear would begin Tommy's education in Apache ways. "First lesson," Red Bear said on their second day together. "Forget everything you think you know about Indians and white men. Out here, there are only people trying to survive and people trying to kill them. The color of their skin matters less than what is in their hearts." Tommy learned to read the desert signs that Red Bear showed him, how to find water by watching where birds flew, how to tell fresh tracks from old ones, how to move quietly through brush and sand. His body ached from riding and his skin burned despite the hat Red Bear had given him. But he never complained. On the third night, as they sat around a small fire, Swift Arrow finally spoke to Tommy directly. "Why do you want to learn Apache ways, white boy? Your people have soft lives in their towns. They do not have to hunt for food or fight for survival." Tommy thought carefully before answering. "My people gave me away when Mama died. Then Papa was given away too. I don't want to be given away anymore. Red Bear says if I learn your ways, I can belong somewhere." Swift Arrow translated this for the others, and Tommy noticed their expressions soften slightly. Grey Wolf nodded slowly and said something that made Red Bear smile. "He says you speak with wisdom for one so young," Red Bear explained. "Perhaps there is Apache spirit in you after all." That night, Tommy had his first dream about his new life. He saw himself grown tall and strong, riding beside Red Bear through the desert. In the dream, he belonged somewhere and no one could ever give him away again. But when he woke the next morning, he was still just a scared 8-year-old boy who missed his parents and didn't know what the future would bring. Red Bear found him crying silently as he tried to pack his few belongings. "Tears are not weakness," Red Bear told him quietly. "Even the strongest warriors cry when they lose what they love. But after the tears, we must choose. Do we let the loss make us weak, or do we let it make us stronger?" "How do I get stronger?" Tommy asked. "One day at a time," Red Bear replied. "One lesson at a time. One choice at a time." As they rode deeper into Apache territory, Tommy began to understand that he was not just learning new skills, he was becoming a different person entirely. The boy who had hidden under the wagon was disappearing, replaced by someone who could ride for hours without complaining, who could spot a rabbit hiding in the brush, who was starting to understand a few words of Apache. On their 5th day together, they encountered other Apache riders, scouts from Red Bear's village who had been searching for him. Tommy's stomach tightened with fear as these new warriors surrounded them, speaking rapidly in Apache while staring at him with suspicious eyes. The conversation grew heated, and Tommy could tell that some of the new arrivals were angry about his presence. One of them, a young man with several scars on his arms, gestured angrily in Tommy's direction while speaking to Red Bear. Finally, Red Bear raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a leader who expected to be obeyed. The other warriors fell quiet, though their expressions remained skeptical. "What did you tell them?" Tommy asked quietly. "I told them you are under my protection," Red Bear replied, "and that anyone who harms you will answer to me personally." Tommy felt a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time since his parents died, someone was willing to fight for him, to protect him, to claim him as their own. "Does that make you my new papa?" Tommy asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Red Bear looked down at the boy riding beside him, seeing the hope and fear warring in those blue eyes. "Not yet, little one," he said gently, "but perhaps someday if you prove worthy of such an honor." The Apache village appeared in the distance like a mirage, nestled in a hidden valley between red stone cliffs. Tommy had never seen anything like it. Dozens of traditional dwellings scattered along a small stream, with horses grazing in natural meadows and smoke rising from cooking fires. It looked peaceful and welcoming, but Tommy's stomach churned with nervousness as they approached. "Remember what I taught you? Red Bear said quietly as they rode down into the valley. Keep your eyes down when you meet the elders. Speak only when spoken to, and no matter what happens, do not show fear. Tommy nodded, though his heart was racing. The past week with Red Bear and his warriors had been difficult but exciting. This felt different. This felt like a test he might fail. As they entered the village, people began to emerge from their homes. Women stopped their weaving to stare. Children ran alongside the horses, chattering excitedly in Apache. Old men gathered in small groups, their weathered faces showing everything from curiosity to open hostility. Tommy kept his eyes fixed on his horse's mane, but he could feel dozens of pairs of eyes studying him. He heard his appearance being discussed in rapid Apache, comments about his pale skin, his light hair, his small size. Even without understanding the words, the tone told him everything he needed to know. He was not welcome here. Red Bear led them to the center of the village where a large fire pit was surrounded by logs that served as benches. Several older men were already waiting there. The village elders, Tommy realized. These were the men who would decide his fate. The oldest of them, a man so ancient his face looked like carved leather, stepped forward as Red Bear dismounted. The two men embraced briefly, then began speaking in low, serious tones. Tommy caught his own name mentioned several times, always followed by what sounded like questions or challenges. Get down from the horse, Red Bear told him in English. Come stand beside me. Tommy slid down from the mare, his legs shaky from days of riding. He walked to Red Bear's side and tried to stand tall, though he felt impossibly small next to the Apache warriors surrounding him. The ancient elder approached him slowly, studying Tommy's face with eyes that seemed to look right through him. When he spoke, his voice was like dry leaves rustling in the wind. He asks what you are called, Red Bear translated. Tommy Mitchell, the boy replied, then quickly added, Sir. The elder spoke again, longer this time, his tone growing sharper. He says Tommy Mitchell is a white man's name, Red Bear explained. He asks why we should allow a white man's child into our village when white men kill Apache children without mercy. Tommy's mouth went dry. This was exactly what he had feared, being judged not for who he was, but for what other people who looked like him had done. He thought of his father's words about good people and bad people, and he knew he had to speak for himself. Tell him I'm not responsible for what other white people do, Tommy said, his voice stronger than he felt. Tell him I'm just a boy who wants to learn and belong somewhere. Red Bear raised an eyebrow at Tommy's boldness, then translated the words. The elder's expression didn't change, but several of the other men began talking among themselves. Some seemed impressed by the boy's courage. Others looked even more suspicious. Another elder stepped forward, a woman this time, her gray hair braided with beads and small bones. She was younger than the ancient man, but carried herself with unmistakable authority. When she spoke, everyone else fell silent. This is White Moon, Red Bear told Tommy quietly. She leads the Women's Council. She has lost 2 sons to cavalry raids. White Moon walked in a slow circle around Tommy, examining him like she was evaluating a horse for purchase. She spoke to Red Bear in rapid Apache, her tone demanding answers. She wants to know why I brought you here instead of leaving you in the desert, Red Bear translated. She says the desert would have been kinder than what awaits you if the village rejects you. Tommy felt cold despite the warm afternoon sun. What happens if they reject me? We find somewhere else for you to go, Red Bear said simply. But that choice is not made yet. White Moon knelt in front of Tommy so their faces were level. Her eyes were hard as flint, but something in her expression reminded him of his own mother, a woman who had learned to be strong because life demanded it. She spoke directly to Tommy, though he couldn't understand her words. She says you look soft, like all white children, Red Bear translated. She asks if you have ever known hunger, ever known cold, ever known what it means to fight for your life. Tommy thought of the past months, watching his mother waste away with fever, traveling across the prairie with dwindling supplies, sitting alone in the desert with his father's body. Tell her I've known all of those things, and I'm still here. When Red Bear translated this, something shifted in White Moon's expression. She asked another question, this one softer. She asks what you hope to gain by staying here. Tommy took a deep breath. This felt like the most important question he would ever be asked. Tell her I want to learn to be strong. I want to belong somewhere where people won't give me away when things get hard. I want to have a family again." White Moon listened to the translation, then spoke at length to the assembled elders. Tommy caught a few words he was beginning to recognize, words for child and family and strong. The discussion that followed was heated, with voices raised and gestures flying. Finally, the ancient elder held up his hand for silence. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of final judgment. "The council has decided," Red Bear told Tommy. "You may stay, but only on trial. You will have one full cycle of seasons to prove yourself worthy of acceptance. If you succeed, you will be adopted into our tribe as a true Apache. If I fail, you will be taken to the nearest fort and given to your own people." Tommy nodded, though his throat felt tight. A year seemed like forever, but it was better than being sent away immediately. "What do I have to do to prove myself?" "You must learn our language, our customs, our skills. You must show that you can contribute to the tribe's survival. Most importantly, you must prove that your loyalty lies with us, not with the white world you came from." That evening, Tommy was given a small space in Red Bear's dwelling, a traditional Apache home made of brush and hides. Red Bear's wife, a quiet woman named Dawn Song, served them a meal of rabbit stew and corn cakes. She didn't speak to Tommy directly, but she made sure his bowl was always full. "Your wife doesn't like me," Tommy observed as they ate. "Dawn Song lost her first son to white soldiers," Red Bear explained. "She sees you and remembers her pain, but she is also a good woman who knows right from wrong. Give her time." That night, lying on a blanket near the fire, Tommy listened to the sounds of the village settling down for sleep. Children laughed somewhere nearby. A woman sang softly to a baby. Men talked in low voices around distant fires. It was peaceful and comforting, but Tommy felt like an outsider looking in. "Red Bear?" he whispered into the darkness. "Yes? What if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't become Apache?" There was a long pause before Red Bear answered. "Strength is not something you are born with, little one. It is something you choose every day in small ways and large ones. Tomorrow you will face your first real test, and then another the day after that. Some you will pass, some you will fail, but if you keep choosing to try, you will become stronger." "What's my first test?" "Learning to survive your first night in an Apache village without running away." Tommy smiled in the darkness. He had already passed that test. He was still here, wasn't he? But as he drifted off to sleep, he wondered what tomorrow would bring and whether he would be brave enough to face it. In his dreams that night, he saw his parents watching him from far away. His mother smiled and nodded, as if she approved of his choice. His father raised his hand in a small wave, then turned and walked away into the darkness. When Tommy tried to follow, he couldn't move. Something was holding him back. He woke to find Dawn Song shaking him gently, her expression kinder than it had been the day before. "Come," she said in careful English. "New day, new lessons." Tommy sat up and looked around the dwelling. Red Bear was already gone, probably off on warrior duties. This was it. His real Apache education was about to begin, and he would have to face it without his protector by his side. The next 6 months tested Tommy in ways he never could have imagined. Dawn Song became his primary teacher, and she proved to be as demanding as she was patient. Every morning before sunrise, she woke him to help with the daily tasks that kept the village running, gathering water from the stream, collecting firewood, helping prepare meals for Red Bear and the other warriors. "Apache women work hard," she told him in her improving English one morning as they ground corn into meal. "Apache men work hard too. No one survives by being lazy." Tommy's hands were raw from learning to weave baskets, his arms ached from hauling water, and his back hurt from bending over plants while Dawn Song taught him which ones could heal and which ones could kill. But slowly he began to understand the rhythm of Apache life, the way every person contributed something essential to the tribe's survival. The children were the hardest part. At first they followed him around like he was a strange animal in a traveling show, pointing and laughing when he made mistakes. Some threw small stones or sticks when the adults weren't watching. A boy named Running Wolf, who was about Tommy's age, seemed to take special pleasure in making his life difficult. "White boy can't even hold a bow properly," Running Wolf taunted one afternoon during archery practice, speaking in English so Tommy would understand. "Maybe white boys are too weak for real weapons." Tommy's face burned with embarrassment as his arrow went wide of the target again. He had been practicing for weeks, but his small hand still struggled with the heavy Apache bow. The other boy snickered, and Tommy felt the familiar sting of not belonging. That evening, he asked Red Bear about it. "How long before they accept me? How long before I'm not just the white boy?" Red Bear was sharpening his knife by the fire, the blade gleaming in the firelight. "Acceptance cannot be demanded, little one. It must be earned. And it is not earned by shooting arrows straight or weaving perfect baskets. Then how? By showing them who you truly are when everything is difficult. By proving that you will stand with them when standing together is the only thing that matters." Tommy didn't understand what Red Bear meant until 3 weeks later, when his chance came in the most unexpected way. He was returning from the stream with Dawn Song, carrying 2 heavy water vessels, when they heard screaming from the far side of the village. People were running toward the sound, and Tommy could see smoke rising from one of the dwellings. "Fire!" Dawn Song gasped, dropping her water containers and running toward the emergency. Tommy followed, his heart racing. Fire was one of the most dangerous threats to any village. The dry brush and hide coverings could burn incredibly fast, spreading from home to home before anyone could stop it. When they reached the burning dwelling, Tommy saw the problem immediately. Little Bear, a 3-year-old girl, was trapped inside while her mother frantically tried to reach her through the flames. The entrance was blocked by burning debris, and the smoke was getting thicker by the minute. The village men were forming water lines and trying to create fire breaks to prevent the blaze from spreading, but no one seemed small enough to crawl through the gap near the ground where the flames were lowest. Without thinking, Tommy dropped his water vessels and ran toward the burning home. "No," Dawn Song shouted after him. "Too dangerous." But Tommy was already moving. He was small and quick, and he could see a path through the flames that would take him to where the little girl was crying. He dropped to his belly and crawled under the burning debris, ignoring the heat that singed his hair and clothes. Inside the dwelling, the smoke was so thick he could barely breathe. Little Bear was huddled in the corner, coughing and crying, too scared to move. Tommy grabbed her and wrapped her in a blanket, then turned back toward the entrance. The flames had grown higher while he was inside. The path he had used to enter was now blocked by falling burning material. For a moment, panic seized him. They were trapped. Then he heard voices outside calling his name. Red Bear's voice, Dawn Song's voice, even Running Wolf's voice. The whole village was shouting encouragement, telling him he could make it, telling him they believed in him. Tommy found strength he didn't know he had. Clutching Little Bear to his chest, he ran straight through the flames, feeling the heat scorch his skin and smother his breathing. He burst through the entrance just as the roof began to collapse behind them. Strong hands pulled him and Little Bear away from the burning dwelling. Dawn Song wrapped them both in wet blankets while White Moon examined the little girl for injuries. Miraculously, except for some smoke inhalation and minor burns, they were both going to be fine. As Tommy sat gasping and coughing, he noticed something had changed. The Apache people who had gathered around weren't looking at him with suspicion or amusement anymore. They were looking at him with respect and something that might have been affection. Running Wolf was the first to approach him. The boy who had tormented him for months now looked at him with something like awe. "That was very brave," he said quietly in Apache, then repeated it in English so Tommy would understand. "I didn't think about it," Tommy replied, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "I just saw that she needed help." "That is what makes it brave," said a voice behind him. Tommy turned to see White Moon approaching. The stern woman who had questioned his worthiness months earlier now knelt beside him with tears in her eyes. "You risked your life for one of our children," she said in careful English. "You did not hesitate, you did not think of yourself. You thought only of saving her." She placed her hand on Tommy's head, her touch gentle despite her calloused fingers. Then she spoke to the gathered crowd in rapid Apache. Tommy caught some of the words: courage, family, one of us. When she finished speaking, the people around them began to nod and murmur their agreement. Some touched Tommy's shoulder as they passed, a gesture of acceptance he had never received from them before. That night, as Dawn Song treated his burns with healing herbs, Red Bear sat beside them with an expression Tommy had never seen before, pride mixed with something deeper. "What White Moon said to the people?" Tommy asked. "What did she tell them?" "She said that today you proved you are not a white boy living among Apache," Red Bear replied. "You are an Apache boy who happens to have pale skin." She said anyone who questions your place here from now on will answer to her personally. Tommy felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with his healing burns. Does that mean I passed the test? I don't have to wait a full year? Donsong looked up from bandaging his hands. There will always be tests, little one. Being Apache is not something you earn once and keep forever. It is something you must choose again every day. But, Red Bear added with a smile, after today no one will question whether you are truly one of us. The next morning, Tommy woke to find a gift waiting beside his sleeping blankets. A new bow, sized perfectly for his small hands with arrows fletched with eagle feathers. There was no note, but Tommy knew it was from Running Wolf. When he went outside to practice, he found not just Running Wolf waiting for him, but several other children as well. They all wanted to help him learn to shoot properly, to teach him their games, to include him in their adventures. Finally, Running Wolf said with a grin, "We have enough boys for a proper hunting party." As Tommy knocked his first arrow with his new bow, he realized something amazing had happened. He wasn't the white boy anymore, wasn't the outsider, wasn't the one who didn't belong. He was just Tommy, friend, brother, member of the tribe. For the first time since his parents died, he felt truly at home. Not because anyone had given him a home, but because he had earned one through his actions and choices. The arrow flew straight and true, hitting the target dead center. The other children cheered, and Tommy smiled as he realized that Red Bear had been right all along. Strength wasn't something you were born with. It was something you chose one day at a time, one moment at a time. And today, Tommy had chosen to be strong enough to belong. 2 years had passed since the fire that changed everything, and Tommy Mitchell was barely recognizable as the scared, pale boy who had hidden under a broken wagon. At 10 years old, he was lean and strong from Apache life, his skin bronzed by the desert sun, his light brown hair grown long and braided with small beads that Donsong had given him. Most importantly, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. The Apache had given him a new name, Brave Fox, after an elder noticed how he could slip silently through the brush and always seemed to find solutions to problems that others missed. But Red Bear still called him Little One in private moments, and Tommy treasured that connection to the man who had saved his life. Spring had come to the desert, bringing with it the season when young Apache boys were expected to prove they were ready to become warriors. Tommy had been preparing for this moment for months, learning advanced tracking, improving his archery until he could hit a target from 100 paces, and studying the complex Apache code of honor that governed every aspect of warrior life. "Today you begin the tests that will make you a man," Red Bear told him as they sat by the fire one early morning. "But remember, little one, being a warrior is not about fighting. It is about protecting what matters most." The first test was survival. Tommy would be taken deep into the desert with nothing but a knife, a water skin, and the clothes on his back. He would have to survive alone for 7 days, finding food, water, and shelter without help from anyone. Many boys failed this test, returning early or being found half dead by search parties. Swift Arrow, who had once questioned Red Bear's decision to save Tommy, was now one of his strongest supporters. He would be the one to take Tommy to the testing grounds and leave him there. "You have learned well, Brave Fox," Swift Arrow said as they rode into the deepest part of the desert. "But learning and doing are different things. Out here, mistakes can kill you." Tommy nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about proving he could survive. It was about proving he deserved the name Red Bear had given him and the trust the tribe had placed in him. Swift Arrow left him at a place where 3 canyons met, a maze of red rock and hidden valleys that could shelter him or trap him, depending on his choices. As the sound of Swift Arrow's horse faded into the distance, Tommy felt the familiar touch of loneliness he remembered from his first days in the desert, but this time he wasn't afraid. He had knowledge now, skills, and most importantly, a purpose. The first 2 days went well. Tommy found a small cave that provided shelter, and a tiny spring that gave him fresh water. He caught lizards and gathered edible plants that Donsong had taught him to identify. He even managed to trap a rabbit using techniques Grey Wolf had shown him. But on the 3rd day, everything changed. Tommy was returning to his cave with an armload of firewood when he heard voices echoing through the canyon. He froze, listening carefully. The voices were speaking English, and they sounded angry and desperate. Moving silently through the rocks, Tommy crept closer until he could see them. 3 white men on horseback, their clothes dusty and torn, their faces burned by the sun. One of them was wounded, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his arm. "We're lost, Bill," one of them was saying. "Been riding in circles for 2 days. That Apache attack scattered us good. Should have killed more of them when we had the chance," the wounded man replied bitterly. "Savages got what they deserved, burning their village like that." Tommy's blood turned to ice. These men were talking about attacking an Apache village. They were talking about his people. "Maybe we can find their main camp," the third man suggested. "Finish what we started." "I heard there's bounty money for Apache scalps in some territories." Tommy had heard enough. These were the kind of men his father had warned him about. The ones who saw Apache people as animals to be hunted rather than human beings with families and dreams. But what could one 10-year-old boy do against 3 armed men? He thought of Red Bear's words about protecting what mattered most. These men were a threat to his tribe, to Dawn Song and White Moon and Running Wolf and all the people who had become his family. Even if he was supposed to be on his survival test, even if it meant breaking the rules, he couldn't let them find the village. Tommy spent the rest of the day shadowing the men, using every stealth technique the Apache had taught him. When they made camp for the night, he crept close enough to hear their plans. They intended to search the canyon systematically until they found signs of Apache presence, then follow those signs back to the village. That night, while the men slept, Tommy began his sabotage. He loosened the shoes on their horses so the animals would go lame after a few miles of travel. He emptied most of their water while leaving just enough that they wouldn't immediately notice. He even managed to dull their knife blades by rubbing them against rough stone. When the men woke and tried to continue their search, everything went wrong for them. Their horses couldn't travel far before going lame. Their water ran out faster than expected. Their weapons were mysteriously damaged. "This place is cursed," one of them muttered after their third horse threw a shoe. "Ain't cursed," the wounded man replied grimly. "We're being hunted. Someone's out there picking us apart piece by piece." For 3 more days, Tommy played a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the men. He led them in circles, always away from Apache territory. He made small noises in the night that kept them awake and jumpy. He left false trails that led to dead ends and impassable ravines. By the 6th day, the men were exhausted, dehydrated, and completely lost. They had given up any hope of finding Apache villages and were focused entirely on finding their way back to civilization. "There," one of them shouted, pointing toward a distant ridge. "Smoke signals." Tommy's heart sank. He had been so focused on keeping the men away from his village that he hadn't noticed the Apache signals in the distance. But as he looked more carefully, he realized these weren't calls for help or warnings of danger. They were the signals that would be sent when his 7-day test was complete, messages telling him to return home. The 3 white men were heading directly toward the meeting point where Swift Arrow would be waiting to collect him. Tommy had a choice to make. He could continue following the men and try to warn Swift Arrow, but that would mean revealing himself and probably getting killed. Or he could race ahead and try to reach the meeting point first, but that would mean abandoning his careful surveillance of the dangerous strangers. He chose a third option, moving faster than he ever had before. Tommy circled around the men and reached the meeting point just as Swift Arrow arrived. The warrior took one look at Tommy's urgent expression and knew something was wrong. 3 white men, Tommy gasped out in Apache, his words tumbling over each other in his haste. "They attacked a village, burned it. They're looking for our people. They want to kill more." Swift Arrow's face darkened with anger, but his voice remained calm. "Where are they?" Tommy pointed toward the approaching dust cloud. "Coming this way. I've been leading them in circles for days, but they're desperate now. Dangerous." Swift Arrow studied the boy who had spent 7 days alone in the desert and still found the strength to protect his tribe. "You did well, brave fox. Now we finish this properly." What happened next taught Tommy more about being an Apache warrior than any test could have. Swift Arrow didn't ambush the 3 men or attack them outright. Instead, he rode out to meet them openly, with Tommy beside him. "You are lost," Swift Arrow said in English when the men approached. The 3 strangers looked at the Apache warrior and the boy with a mixture of fear and hope. They were too exhausted to fight, too desperate to be suspicious. "We're looking for the nearest fort," the wounded man said. "Been lost for days." Swift Arrow pointed toward the east. 2 days' ride. Follow the setting sun behind you, then the morning sun ahead of you. Do not deviate from this path." The men thanked him and rode away, never knowing how close they had come to finding the Apache village they sought, never realizing that the small boy who had frustrated their plans for days was sitting right in front of them. As Tommy and Swift Arrow rode home together, the boy finally understood what Red Bear had meant about protecting what mattered most. Being a warrior wasn't about being the strongest or the fiercest. It was about using your strength and skills to keep your people safe, even when that meant sacrificing your own comfort or safety. "Did I pass the test?" Tommy asked as they approached the village. Swift Arrow smiled. "Little one, you didn't just pass the test. You showed us what it truly means to be Apache." 5 years had passed since Tommy's warrior test, and the boy who had once wept beside his father's grave had become a man of 21 winters. The Apache knew him as Brave Fox, a name that carried respect throughout the territory. But to Red Bear he would always be Little One, the son who had come to him through tragedy and grown into something beautiful. The world outside Apache lands was changing rapidly. Gold had been discovered in the nearby mountains, bringing floods of prospectors and settlers. The cavalry patrols were more frequent and more aggressive. Treaties were made and broken with disturbing regularity. The old ways of life were being squeezed from all sides. Tommy stood on a ridge overlooking the valley where his Apache family lived, watching the smoke rise from their cooking fires. He was dressed in traditional Apache clothing, his long hair braided with eagle feathers that marked his status as a proven warrior. His skin was weathered by 2 decades of desert sun, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen both the beauty and harshness of the world. Beside him, Red Bear sat his horse with the bearing of a man who had led his people through countless challenges. Silver now dominated his hair, and lines of worry creased his face more deeply than before. The years had been kind to neither of them, but they had faced those years together. "The soldiers are coming," Red Bear said quietly, his eyes fixed on the distant dust clouds approaching from the east. "The fort commander wants to meet with our elders." Tommy nodded grimly. He had been expecting this day for months. The government was forcing Apache tribes onto reservations, and their small band had managed to avoid that fate longer than most. But now it seemed their time of freedom was ending. "What will you tell them?" Tommy asked. "I will tell them what I have always told them, that we want to live in peace, but we will not be herded like cattle onto land that cannot support us." They rode back to the village together, just as they had done countless times over the years. But this time felt different. This time felt like an ending. The meeting took place in the center of the village with the Apache elders seated in a circle and the cavalry officers standing stiffly in their blue uniforms. Tommy recognized the fort commander, a man named Colonel Morrison who had a reputation for fairness but also for following orders without question. "Red Bear," Colonel Morrison said formally, "I've come to offer your people a final chance to relocate peacefully to the reservation. The government is prepared to provide supplies and protection if you agree to move within 30 days. And if we refuse?" Red Bear asked. "Then I'll be forced to remove you by military action. I don't want that, and I don't think you do either." Tommy watched the exchange with growing tension. He understood both sides of this argument. The colonel was trying to avoid bloodshed while following his orders. Red Bear was trying to protect his people's way of life while facing an impossible situation. What happened next would change everything. A young Apache warrior named Black Wolf, who had lost his family in a recent cavalry raid, suddenly stood up and began speaking angrily to the soldiers in Apache. His words were hostile, accusatory, and growing more heated by the moment. Colonel Morrison's hand moved toward his sidearm, and Tommy saw several soldiers shift their positions nervously. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. "What is he saying?" Morrison demanded. Before Red Bear could answer, Tommy stepped forward. "He's saying that his family died because of broken promises," Tommy said in English, his voice calm and clear. "He's saying that he doesn't trust any white man's word because white men have lied to his people too many times." Morrison looked at Tommy with surprise. "You speak English? Who are you?" "I am Brave Fox," Tommy replied. "I am Apache." "You don't look Apache." "Looks can deceive, Colonel. I was born white, but I was raised Apache. This is my family, my tribe, my people. Their fate is my fate." Morrison studied Tommy carefully, and something in the young man's bearing seemed to give him pause. If you're white by birth, you could leave with us. The army doesn't make war on white civilians. Tommy felt every eye in the village upon him. This was the moment he had somehow always known would come. The moment when he would have to choose definitively between the world of his birth and the world of his heart. I appreciate the offer, Tommy said quietly, but I made my choice years ago. I am Apache. I stand with my people whatever comes. Red Bear's eyes filled with pride and something that might have been tears. White Moon nodded approvingly. Even Black Wolf stopped his angry speech to stare at the pale-skinned man who claimed Apache blood. Colonel Morrison sighed deeply. Son, do you understand what you're choosing? If your people resist relocation, there will be fighting. Good men will die on both sides. I understand perfectly, Tommy replied, but you're asking us to choose between dying as free people or dying slowly on a reservation that can't support us. Some choices aren't really choices at all. The colonel was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces around him. Finally, he spoke again, but this time his voice was gentler, more personal. What if there was another option? What if I could arrange for your band to be settled on better land, with guarantees of supplies and protection? It wouldn't be complete freedom, but it would be life. Red Bear and the elders exchanged glances. This was more than they had dared hope for. Why would you do this? Red Bear asked suspiciously. Morrison looked at Tommy. Because this young man just reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Honor isn't about following orders blindly. Sometimes honor means finding a better way. The negotiations that followed took 3 days. Tommy served as translator and mediator, using his unique position as someone who understood both cultures to help bridge the gap between two very different ways of seeing the world. In the end, they reached an agreement. The Apache would relocate, but to land of their own choosing in a valley that could support their traditional lifestyle. They would receive guaranteed supplies and protection, and in return, they would agree to peace with white settlers and safe passage for travelers through their territory. It wasn't perfect, but it was survival with dignity intact. On the last night before the move, Tommy sat with Red Bear beside the fire where they had shared so many conversations over the years. Do you ever regret it? Red Bear asked quietly. Choosing us over your birth people? Tommy thought for a moment, remembering the scared boy who had hidden under a wagon so long ago. Papa used to tell me that family isn't about blood, he said finally. It's about the people who choose to love you and stand by you when everything falls apart. You chose me when I had nothing. You called me son when I had no father. How could I regret that? Red Bear smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. You have given me great pride, little one. Not because you became Apache, but because you became a good man. I had a good teacher. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low and the village settled into sleep around them. Tomorrow would bring change and uncertainty, but tonight they were still father and son, still family, still bound together by something stronger than blood or tribe or the color of their skin. In the morning they would lead their people to a new home, but they would go together, and that made all the difference. Tommy looked up at the stars and thought about the boy who had once cried that he was given away just like Papa. That boy had been wrong. He hadn't been given away. He had been given a gift. The gift of belonging, the gift of family, the gift of becoming exactly who he was meant to be. As the fire died to glowing embers, Red Bear spoke one last time. Sleep well, my son. Tomorrow we begin again. And Tommy smiled, because he knew that whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it as part of something larger than himself. He would face it as Apache. He would face it as family. He would face it as a man who had found his place in the world and chosen to keep it, no matter what the cost. The lost boy who had wept in the desert was gone forever, replaced by someone strong enough to protect what mattered most, wise enough to build bridges between different worlds, and brave enough to call the right people family. Red Bear had kept his promise from so long ago. He had made Tommy stronger, but more than that, he had made him whole.